who have complicated immigration histories and need to resolve some problems before they can get on a path to residency. And we also now are doing deportation defense. So we're helping people in removal proceedings, either people who've been here for a long time and have come in contact with immigration, or for people who are new arrivals who've been arriving on our southern border and have made it in and now have to make their case before a judge. We have some information about our Oakland office here. We do, in normal times, consultations every Thursday in our office without appointments. We're still doing consultations now, but by phone. So people call in and they get an appointment, and then they talk on the phone with an attorney. And surprisingly, that's actually been going pretty well. So, okay. So this is basically what I'm planning to talk about today. And I think, Kevin, you are taking questions, right? So at any point, jump in with questions. One strange thing about this Zoom phenomenon is that I feel like I'm talking to myself. So if you have questions, I think you can put them in the chat box and Kevin's going to moderate. And I'm very happy to stop and answer questions.
Thanks, Sarah.
So
I'll moderate the chat box and I'll also moderate the raise hand feature. So either way, I will make sure that you get the questions.
Great, good, thank you. And so we're going to do a really short immigration overview of how our immigration system works. Then we'll talk about some updates on immigration policies. We'll sort of do that along the way. And then we're going to talk about a new change that's very important that you might have heard about, which is the public charge issue, a new hurdle for people who are trying to become legal residents. And we're going to talk about the COVID-19 situation and how that's impacting our immigrant communities. So very quickly, what is an immigrant? Well, if you're in the United States, you can fall into one of a very few categories. You might be a citizen, which means you're born in the United States, or you became a citizen after you were born for some reason. You can be a green card holder or a legal permanent resident, which means that you have the right to live here and work here permanently. You could be a visitor, so a non-immigrant, but someone who's here temporarily, illegally, a student, a tourist, a temporary worker. You could be a humanitarian immigrant. That's someone who maybe is asking for asylum or asking for a protection as a victim of crime or trafficking. Or you might be here without permission. If you entered the country without inspection, or you entered with a visa and stayed beyond your authorized period of stay.
Sarah, really quick, I have a question.
Yeah.
Are the phone consultations that your organization offers, are those free?
They are normally $30, but for certain categories of people, they are free. If you are in removal proceedings, they're free. If you're a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, it's free. If you are, if certain other categories are free, but most are $30.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, US citizens are people who enjoy the greatest array of rights and benefits in our society. US citizens can vote in our elections. They can travel in and out of the country freely. They can leave the country for years at a time and then have the right to come back. They can't be deported with, very, very, very narrow exceptions to that. And they can petition for their family members to become permanent residents. And they can petition for spouses, for children, whether they're under 21 or over 21, for their parents, and for their brothers and sisters. US citizens are eligible also for the full array of public benefits. They can get all government jobs, and they can, in many circumstances, have dual citizenship with another country. Green card holders have also it's a fairly secure status in the United States. You're allowed to work and live lawfully in the United States forever. You can stay in the United States even if you don't have a job. You can sponsor certain family members for green cards, spouses and children, unmarried children. And a green card is a pathway to citizenship. So if you're a green card holder, in certain circumstances, you can then convert to US citizenship. And one thing about green card holders that many people don't know is if you have a green card, it'll have an expiration date. They usually issue them for 10 years. And so people often think that when their card expires, that their status expires, but that's actually not the case. Your status as a legal permanent resident is permanent, and that card is only an identification card. So even if your card has expired, you're still allowed to live and work in the United States. So non-immigrants, that's a really big, broad category of people, students, tourists, temporary workers. You know, you're allowed to be here for a certain period of time and a certain purpose. You can't go beyond that time or that purpose. It's not a pathway to residency or to citizenship, and you're not allowed to sponsor relatives to become green card holders, although sometimes you can bring them with you on your status. And then undocumented people are people who don't have permission to be in the US. So in theory, if immigration were to find them, they could try to remove them. But it's important to understand that even if you don't have permission to be here, you still have a wide array of rights. For example, if you're working here without permission, you still have rights to enjoy all of the labor protections that anyone else does. Your employer still has to pay you minimum wage, they have to obey safety standards, they have to pay you overtime, your landlord still has to abide by the rules, you still have rights. If you're undocumented, you also may have a pathway to residency, and that's what we're going to be talking about in a minute.
Sarah, a couple questions. One is, what do families do if they don't have the money to pay for services? Are there any options for them? And then the second question is, does the person need to reapply for a green card once it expires?
Yeah, good question. So the first, I think you're talking about, if you're talking about our organization and whether, you know, people who can't pay will get services. We never turn someone away because they can't pay. So with respect to our services, you know, we make it work out. With respect to immigration fees, you know, there may or may not be a way to get fee waivers depending on what you're applying for. And we're going to talk a little bit about this public charge issue for people who are trying to get residency. And that gets very much into the question of, you know, do people who are of limited means have access to our immigration system? It's a very important question right now, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the second question was, I'm sorry?
The second question was, does the person need to reapply for a green card once it expires?
Yeah, so generally, yes, you want to reapply for your green card or try to become a citizen. But you know, you don't absolutely have to. If you don't need to show you know, a card to an employer, or you don't need to travel outside of the country, you can actually let your green card lapse without a whole lot of consequence. But generally, people like to renew it. When people come in and they've had that green card for 10 years and they're talking about renewing, generally we ask them whether they want to become citizens, which brings us to our next slide. You can become a citizen after you've had a green card in most cases for 5 years. If you're married to a US citizen, you can become a citizen after 3 years. You have to be older than 18. You have to have spent most of the last 5 years, you know, in the United States, so you couldn't have been traveling out of the country for a long time. You have to be a person of good moral character, which means you can't be on probation while you apply. You can't have certain, you know, criminal convictions within the last 5 years. Certain other criminal convictions lead to bigger problems, and then most people have to pass a basic test in English about US history and civics, and it's 100 possible questions. You know, there's a book that you can study. They ask you 10 and you have to get 6 right. And really, this is the scariest part for so many people, but most people are able to pass this test. You can see on the chart that if you're older and you've had your residency for a long time, you may have the right to take the test in your native language, which is very helpful. Or even if you're over 65 and have been a permanent resident for 20 or more years, to get an easier test. And that just means there's only 20 questions they could ask you, and they'll ask you 10 and you have to get 6 right. If you have some sort of impediment to being able to take the test, a disability, you can get a waiver for it as well, and people do. So we encourage anybody who can to become a citizen, because this is really the best way to have security in the United States, to be able to take part in our civic institutions, and to protect yourself and your loved ones. Okay. Citizens can apply for relatives to get green cards, and they can apply for spouses, children under 21, parents, siblings, children over 21, whether they're married or not. And generally, citizens can apply for more relatives more quickly than green card holders. Green card holders can apply for only their spouses and their unmarried children. So whether the children are under 21 or over 21, they have to be unmarried. So it's a much more limited kind of family petition that's allowed when you're a green card holder. This slide is kind of in the weeds, but you know, for family petitions, you know, either some people get to do the whole process in the United States if they're in the United States, and some people have to leave the country. We generally like to keep people in the United States if we can, because if anything goes wrong, you know, they're here, they're not separated from families, and we have more input as attorneys. But some people, particularly people who've entered the country without inspection and been here for a long time without permission, oftentimes they have to leave the country. They may need some immigration waivers they need to clear some obstacles before they can leave the country. And then they leave the country for their immigrant visa interview in their home country, and then they return as green card holders. But in that case, they really need to do this with lawyers, because it's tricky. You want to make sure that people don't have any other problems that are going to keep them outside of the country and make them stuck. Okay, well, let's talk about DACA, the Dreamers and Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this program. It was started under President Obama in 2012 because, Congress has failed to do its job, which is Congress has failed to pass any substantial legislation about immigration since 1996. So 24 years, we've had no new immigration laws. And we had a whole generation of kids who came here at very young ages who were stuck in this undocumented status, which prevented them from working, from studying, from progressing with their lives, from contributing to their families and their communities. It was just a very needless waste of potential. And Obama could not pass a law by himself, but he did the next best thing, which he made an executive order that said, in certain circumstances, we're going to give people who came here as kids the ability to stay here legally, work, and you know, get a social security number, get a driver's license. And this has brought about almost 1 million young people kind of into the fold, letting them study, work legally, get on with their lives. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has tried to end this program, and this is currently being debated in the courts. The lower courts have said that Trump cannot end it without a good reason, and the Supreme Court heard arguments. The arguments on appeal in October. We're expecting a decision really shortly, probably by June. We think, given the composition of the court and the way the arguments went, that DACA will be ended. And so the takeaway is that for anyone who has DACA now, we're trying to renew it as quickly as possible so that hopefully they'll get 2 additional years of legal status and work permission. And in that time, something will happen, whether we get a new administration that will legislate a solution, whether Congress wakes up anyway and decides to create a solution. But so DACA holders should renew now. The good news is there's lots of free legal services available to them. We do the renewal work for free. We have filing fee assistance. So normally it costs $495 to renew your work authorization document. We've got this covered so that DACA recipients can renew their status free of charge, basically. This only works for people who have DACA. For people who've never had it but who would qualify, unfortunately, it's too late. The courts have said that Trump can end that part of the program. So sadly, you have to be 15 years old to apply for DACA the first time, and there's a whole cohort of kids who've turned 15 after Trump ended it who haven't been able to access this very important form of relief. So within the COVID epidemic, it's important to understand that DACA recipients are working with authorization and legal social security numbers, so they're eligible for unemployment if they're otherwise qualified, and and that will not affect them in any way in future applications. So that's an important thing to understand. Another thing is that their social security numbers stay with them for life. So even if their immigration status ends, they still have that good number, which is important for working and living and having bank accounts and everything else that we need in our society.
Sarah, we've got another
Yeah.
question, and let me know if I need to hold off on some of the questions just so you can get through the material. Question from Darren. The coronavirus disaster relief assistance for immigrants will start on Monday, May 18th. Is there any negative impact if immigrants decide to apply?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, perfect.
Can I put that off a little bit?
Yes,
that's I think the question of the moment. So good question.
Yes, here's another couple of questions, and you can just let me know if you're going to get to it later. Is that what was causing them not to be eligible for receiving their college diplomas? And I believe she was referring to the DACA. And yeah, Rachel, please let me know if that's not correct.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but I think that for DACA recipients, there's been some of the access to financial aid, say, is state-based, so they may have different abilities depending on where they live about access to in-state tuition or financial aid. I think California, we've been fairly inclusive in our policies towards DACA recipients, and others in other states that isn't the case. I think there's no DACA recipients can get college degrees. There's nothing, there's no law that says that they can't. There's been some debate about whether they're allowed to have professional licenses like law licenses, and I think that's also been decided in favor of the DACA recipients, that yes, you have DACA recipients who are lawyers and doctors and other professional licenses. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, Rachel, if that does not answer your question, please let me know. And then one last question before you move on. Will applying for unemployment count against anyone as public charge? Is that something you'll get to?
Again, a super good question. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but the short answer is no, which is good news.
Okay, all right.
So TPS, temporary protected status, another humanitarian form of relief for people from countries with civil unrest, environmental issues like hurricanes or earthquakes. It's provided, a lot of people the ability to live and work here for a long time, including, importantly, many Salvadoreños people from El Salvador who have been here sometimes since the early 90s. And who've been able to live and work legally. The Trump administration is trying to end a number of these programs right now. They are the people who hold TPS from these countries are in status until January 2021. We don't really know what's going to happen after that. But the takeaway is that anyone who has TPS that's ending should get a legal consultation, because if they have a way to get on a path to residency, you know, now is the time to get on it. Other, you know, immigration remedies and statuses involve humanitarian protections. VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act. It protects immigrants against abusive relatives who are citizens or residents. It's not just for women, it's for children and men and elders. If you have a relative who is abusive, who could otherwise petition for you, it lets you petition by yourself so that you can remove yourself from this cycle of control and abuse and safely pursue your residency. So it's a very important remedy for victims of domestic violence, and you know, a very important path to relief for many immigrants. The U visa, probably some of you have heard about. This is a visa available for victims of crime. If you've been the victim of a serious crime, you've been helpful to the police, you've suffered harm as a result of that, you can get on a pathway to residency. It's very important because it's very forgiving of past immigration violations and of other things that might stand in the way of getting your residency, you know, including public charge. So many people who've been here a long time, who have complicated immigration histories, who've maybe come in without inspection, spent years here, left for whatever reason, and then re-entered across the border, those people can't get on a pathway to residency through a family member. And sometimes the U visa is really the only path that's available to them. It's a long path to residency. Right now, if I put in a U visa application today, I can expect to wait about 4 years before I'll get a decision. In the meantime, there's really no benefit. It doesn't protect you against deportation, and it doesn't give you the right to work here, a work permit. But it does give you the right in California to certain social services, and that's helpful. If your case is approved after 4 years, you don't get a U visa then, because there's a national limit of 10,000 a year. Many more people than that every year ask for it. So there's a backlog, there's a line. So if your case is approved after 4 years, you go into another deferred action state where you do get work authorization, permission to stay, but you have to wait, you know, maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 3, until that U visa becomes available. When you get the U visa, you have it for 3 years, and then you can apply for your green card. So we tell people it's about a 9 or 10 year path to residency, but if it's the only path you've got, you know, it's good to get on it, and that time passes whether or not, you know, you do it. So it's, again, a very important form of relief for many, many undocumented people in the Bay Area. And actually, one more thing. I said it doesn't give you protection against deportation while you're waiting for your decision if you've applied for a U visa, but you haven't gotten a decision yet. And actually, if immigration were to find you and put you in removal proceedings and you have a pending U visa, there are a number of judges in San Francisco and everywhere who would put your case aside while they wait for that decision. So it does actually give you perhaps some protection against removal, even though it doesn't give you the right, it doesn't give you a work authorization document or a reason to not put you in removal proceedings. T visas are another kind of visa that is humanitarian for people who've been trafficked, who've been brought into the country for the purposes of forced labor. We think of it often as being sex trafficked, and that's certainly part of the T visa protections, but it's not only that. It's available for people who've been trafficked for other kinds of labor. And we're seeing this just incidentally as being more applicable now, or being of Central America, that sometimes they're coming in and they're being put to work against their will. So again, an important form of relief. Here are just some other immigration remedies. cancellation of removal is only available to people before the immigration court. But again, for people who've been here a long time without status and who have family members in the US, it's a way that if immigration finds them and tries to deport them, they can get a judge to stop the deportation and give them a green card. So very important tool for undocumented people. And often when people come to me and they've been here a long time and they might not have a path to residency, you know, we can talk about there's nothing you can do right now, but in the worst case scenario, if immigration were to find you, you would have a way to possibly stop the deportation and to end up with a green card. So it can be reassuring to people to know that they've got, you know, a potential way to stop from being removed. Asylum is a protection that's available to people who are fleeing persecution in their home countries. It's a tricky and difficult remedy to win in these times. The Trump administration has really tried to limit asylum and to possibly end asylum, both by closing our borders so that people can't get in, and also by creating all sorts of legal roadblocks once they're here. But we're still fighting for it. It's a very important form of relief, and hopefully it will be around for a long time. There are special pathways for immigrant juveniles. These are people who are under 21 without, who arrive without a parent, and they have to show that they can't reunify with one or both parents because of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. They can, you know, many kids come here and to be reunited with one parent here in the United States, and they are still often eligible for special immigrant juvenile status. So it's an important form of relief for young people. Okay, public charge, the issue that it sounds like people are familiar with and that has been really a focus of the Trump administration. Public charge is a ground, well, we're going to talk about what it is and who's affected by this and how the analysis that immigration is now using when they evaluate public charge. Public charge is a ground of an admissibility, which basically is a technical legal term. It's a ground of eligibility or ineligibility for a green card. When you apply to become a resident, a legal permanent resident, you have to show in many cases that you won't become dependent on the government for your support. You won't become a public charge. Until February 24th of this year, that meaning was very limited. It was that you had to get long-term cash, you had to get cash assistance or long-term institutional care, and any other kind of benefits didn't count for this analysis. But the Trump administration did start a new rule that took effect on February 24th, only applies to applications filed on or after February 24th. So any application for residency that was in before that will fall under the old rules and not the new rules. So public charge only applies to people who are asking for a green card for their residency. It doesn't apply to people who already have their green card. It doesn't apply to people who are trying to become citizens. And it's mostly going to affect people who are applying to become residents through a family member. And again, the analysis now is a future analysis. It's are you going to be a public charge in the future? Not really, have you been a public charge in the past? And the test looks at a totality of the circumstances. So it's a holistic approach to whether you're going to become a public charge. They look at positive factors and negative factors to see whether you're likely to use public benefits in the future. So some people so again, just to review, it only affects people who are asking for a green card. Those are the only people who are affected by this, and not even all of these people are affected by it. So anybody who is a refugee or an asylee is exempt. It doesn't matter whether they're a public charge. They can use any and all public benefits and not worry about this affecting their green card applications. Other humanitarian residency applicants. So if you have a U visa or a T visa, it doesn't matter whether you've used public benefits or not. It's not going to affect your case. Special immigrants juvenile status, again, doesn't matter. Self-petitioners under VAWA, under the Violence Against Women's Act, again, it doesn't matter whether you've used public benefits or not. And again, people who are in immigration court and are asking for cancellation of removal because they've lived in the United States for 10 years, because they have US citizen or resident family members who would suffer extreme hardship if they can't stay, they also don't have to show that they won't be a public charge. And then once again, this test doesn't apply to anyone who's applying for citizenship. It doesn't apply if you're renewing your DACA or your TPS, or if you're renewing your green card or replacing your green card. So the only people who are affected by this new rule are people who are trying to get their green cards. And so what is this totality of the circumstances test? They're looking at many aspects of your financial life, including whether you have used benefits over the last 3 years. Now, again, we're kind of in the weeds here, but this policy only started on February 24th, and they're not supposed to look at use of benefits before that. So people who have been using benefits that would affect their application right now could disenroll without it, in theory, affecting their chances of getting a green card. And another thing is that, you know, this policy has been in effect since February 24th. So immigration lawyers, we have now been using the new forms that we have to fill out for residency applications. This includes a form from the petitioner, the sponsor, saying that they'll support the applicant and that they have a sufficient income to support the applicant. And if their income isn't enough, we need a co-sponsor to put in financial information saying that he or she will support the applicant. Now we have to put in more forms that look at the applicant's credit history if they have one, and their credit score if they have one, and their assets and their education. But we've only been putting these applications in now for about 2 months, so we don't know how they're going to be decided. That's the big question mark. Kevin, did you?
Yeah, we've got a question. What about if a person is in the process of adjustment of status to become permanent resident? And Rebecca, if you want to give some more context for that, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, that is exactly the case. So when you are adjusting status to permanent resident, that is an application for permanent residency or a green card. So that is the situation where this is going to apply unless you are a refugee, an asylee, a U visa holder or a T visa holder or a special immigrant juvenile or a VAWA self-petitioner. Those people, it doesn't matter. But if you are applying through a family member, say your spouse is petitioning for you and you're applying to adjust your status to legal permanent resident as a part of a family petition, you are going to have to meet this new public charge test. And that means that normally, if I'm a citizen and I'm applying for my spouse, I have to show that I work and that I earn enough money to support my spouse to 125% of the poverty level. And if I don't, I need to find someone else, you know, maybe my brother or my cousin or somebody who makes more money who can put in an affidavit of support promising to support my spouse. But if my income is very, very close to the limit, just over the limit, then now with this new definition, this is where things get tricky, because before February 24th, if I made, $2 above that limit, 125% of the poverty level, that was it. I'd met the burden. We're done. But now it's totality of the circumstances. So they're going to look and they're going to say, wow, Sarah makes not very much money. She just made the limit. And let's look, let's look at the credit history of the spouse. Whoa, the spouse has been bankrupt. The spouse has a terrible credit score. The spouse hasn't worked. It's going to be a more difficult burden to meet if they're looking at a lot of different factors. And one of the factors that they're looking at is whether the applicant, not the petitioner, not the citizen or resident family member, but the applicant has received more than one benefit type. More than 12 months of benefits in the last 36 months. So if they've used public benefits in the past. So for many people, especially people who are undocumented, who now have a path to residency, this actually won't affect them that much because they don't qualify for most benefits. So they won't have had access to the type of benefits that will create problems. For certain people, if you've had DACA, if you've had TPS, if you were a student and now you're applying for residency, you might have had access to these benefits. So past use of benefits could be a problem. Right now, for those people who fall into that category, we're saying disenroll, because again, they're not looking earlier than February 24th. So you can disenroll and sort of end the problem. As we go forward, it's going to become more of a problem if this policy stands. But so they are looking at public benefit use to see whether you're likely to become a public charge. They're looking in the future, but they're looking at the past to predict the future. They're now considering more types of benefits that can be used against an applicant, and they're looking at this list of positive and negative factors to see who could be a public charge.
Okay.
So which benefits count against applicants now?
There was a follow-up question, Sarah, really quick. It says, how can you be a resident, I believe? And Aaliyah Vasquez, if you want to clarify that question, please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, maybe she'll clear it up in the chat box.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
Hello?
go. Yes.
Yeah. I see some people, they need some paper and they say how I can be a resident. The parents sometimes they ask me, I say, I don't know what I can do that. I say, maybe you need leave alone right here, or I don't know what I need for be a resident.
Yeah. So if people don't have status and they want to become legal permanent residents, there are a variety of ways that people can get there. Some of them we went over just a few minutes ago. If they've been a victim of a crime, if they are fearing persecution in their home countries, there might be a way. But the way that most people get their residency is through family members petitioning. So if they have a spouse or a parent or a child who's over 21, in some cases a brother or sister, they can petition for them. And that's how most people become residents, through family members who are citizens or residents themselves who petition for them. And that's why many people who've been here even for a long time might not know all the ways that they can become residents, or might not know the process. And that's often, for many of our consultations, that's what we do. We go through the immigration history, we go through people's families to try to see whether there's any way that we can take someone without status and help them get their residency. And the public charge that we're talking about right now is only going to apply to people who are getting their residency through a family member. So a spouse, a child who's over 21, a parent in most cases.
Aaliyah said thank you.
Okay, so you know, before February 24th, immigration only looked at long-term institutional care and cash aid, like temporary aid for needy families. Now they're still looking at cash assistance, and they're looking at Medi-Cal, they're looking at food stamps, and they're looking at Section 8 or subsidized housing. And remember, these are only for the applicant. So many applicants will have kids who get food stamps. That's fine. These are only benefits that the applicant, him or herself, has received. Many people who are undocumented won't qualify for these. So it won't be an issue because they've never been eligible for them. But it doesn't matter what your family members use. It's really what you've used. I did want to say, I think last year when I was talking at a First Five meeting, someone had asked about housing assistance. And this has been a tricky question for us because if you're in a mixed family where your spouse is a citizen and your kids are citizens, and you're all living in subsidized housing, does that mean you've been receiving a benefit? And I think we in the legal community are still trying to sort this out. What I understand is that many Section 8 and subsidized housing programs in the Bay Area have thought about this, and they are very careful that the people who are eligible, the citizens and the residents, get subsidized housing, but if there's an undocumented person in the household, that portion of the rent is not subsidized. So that is a good thing, which means that many of our clients whose families are receiving subsidized housing will still not run into problems because of the public charge issue. But this is something that we're trying to figure out, like, the best practices in terms of analyzing this. We're looking at the contracts and making sure that the undocumented resident is actually paying an unsubsidized portion of the rent. But we're hoping that this won't become a real stumbling block for people. Okay, here are some benefits that will not affect residency applications. So any Medi-Cal for children under 21, and that is whether they are applicants for residency or not. So you don't have to worry about kids under 21 and Medi-Cal. Emergency Medi-Cal, which many undocumented people are eligible for, that is not going to count against you. Prenatal Medi-Cal, just as well. School services like free lunch, Head Start, and food stamps received by your family. Unemployment insurance, this has come up a lot with COVID-19. Unemployment insurance is not a means-tested public benefit. It's an insurance program. You pay into it, you get it back when you need it. It's like a rainy day fund, so it will not count against you for any future residency application. You know, a sidebar on this, which you might know, is that undocumented people don't qualify for unemployment insurance because it's available to people who are working with valid work authorization and social security numbers. So people who are working under the table or with a false social security number without employment authorization, they're not going to qualify for the usual unemployment insurance. So now this new, totality of the circumstances analysis that we don't really have experience yet in seeing how decisions are made, but positive things for applicants for green cards who are not exempt from the public charge question. Positive things would be a work history, even with authorization or without authorization. And I've got to say that when I send people outside the country to consular process for their interviews, they've been using this totality of the circumstances test for about 2 years now. And it's a little tricky because on the official paperwork, if you're working without authorization, your income doesn't count. But they see it when you go to the interview in Ciudad Juarez. And in general, the consular officers have seen that, you know, young, healthy people who are, you know, working without authorization are still working, and they're still, you know, I make sure that my clients pay taxes so they can put their tax returns or their tax transcripts in, and they see that they've been working, and that can go a long way to settling this question of public charge. So I'll say it again later, but it's important, you know, even if you're working without permission, you can get that ITIN number that lets you pay taxes. And if you ever have a way to become a resident, that's going to be very helpful to show that you've been paying taxes and that you have been working, because it comes in, especially now with this new totality of the circumstances analysis to public charge. So if you've got a work history, that's good. If you're healthy and between the ages of 18 and 61, that's considered prime working age. That's considered a positive factor in your favor. If you have an affidavit of support showing that your sponsor, your petitioner, or your co-sponsor earns over 250% of the poverty guidelines, that's a very positive factor. You know, unfortunately for our clients, most of our clients won't hit that mark. That's, I guess, the way it is at the moment. Speaking English is a positive factor. Having education or training is a positive factor. Having having private health insurance twice on there. It must be on my mind. That's a positive factor. You may have heard that, God, I don't even, it's so hard to keep track of like when all these new things happen. But at some point in the recent past, you know, the Trump administration tried to slap on a requirement that all green card applicants have private health insurance. I mean, it was crazy. And, you know, it was, they made the announcement and it was effective, you know, the day afterwards. I had a client who was leaving for his interview in Ciudad Juarez, and, you know, so we quickly like found a health policy that he could buy that day, so that he'd have it when he went to his interview. But then the court stopped it. So that is not, they've not been able to require that you have health insurance, but it's now considered a positive factor. And we're encouraging people who are able to get health insurance to have that policy in place. You know, that might not be possible for everybody, but if it's not, we're trying to think of a plan so that you can get it as soon as you have your residency. So so that's, and I think as soon as they're able, the Trump administration will try to make that a firm requirement. Which, yeah, I mean, don't get me started, but you know, they won't insure, they won't provide health insurance for all of the citizens and residents who live here, but they'll require people to have it anyway. So things that can hurt your case. If you have a limited work history, that can hurt your case. And again, you know, don't get me started for people who've been homemakers or full-time caregivers. You know, they say that they'll take that into consideration, but still the whole framework of analysis seems to minimize that. If you've received 12 months of benefits in the last 3 years, that's considered a strong negative factor. Again, they're only starting at February 24th, so that's not going to be an issue yet. They've got this complicated way of analyzing it so that if you get, you know, food stamps and subsidized housing, that counts as 2 months of benefits, right? That particular analysis is going to get complicated. And I think we're going to be telling people at some point to consider disenrolling in certain things. But again, this is only people who are not exempt from the public charge. Many undocumented people won't have access to these benefits. So the total number of immigrants that this affects is smaller than we might imagine, but we do have to be careful that for those immigrants who are subject to this, that we advise them as best we can. So people who are, very old or very young or have a serious medical condition, this is going to affect your case. I've had to recently advise a 66-year-old woman whose family is working but low income, that I didn't think she should leave the country to go to her interview in Mexico, because I thought she was going to get hung up on this and not be able to come back. And it's just very hard to get around. It's very frustrating. It's going to affect older, low income immigrants. And I think it's a disgrace, but it's the reality that we're in at the moment. Again, a lack of medical insurance can be a factor as well, especially if you have a medical condition or if you're elderly or getting towards elderly. So, since this is a forum on fatherhood, I thought I would come up with just some things that seem to come up with my immigrant fathers. So if you are, I'm thinking particularly of my clients who have been undocumented here for a long time and have a way to get a green card through family members. It's very helpful if they can show that they have paid taxes, even if they're working without authorization and without a real Social Security card. You can get a number from the IRS that will let you pay taxes. And again, it's just, especially for fathers, if you have a household setup where the father is undocumented and is providing, is the financial supporter of the family, and the mother is working at home, you're going to need someone else to sponsor the family, but it's super helpful to show that that father has been working. And then you can make the argument, I think, absolutely on very firm ground, that once this father gets residency, he's going to be much better provider for his family. The family income is likely to go up. The family well-being is likely to go up, and that they're not only is the father less likely to be a public charge, but all the family is going to do better. So taxes are a great way to show this. A large number of my clients are working in areas like construction, where they might be able to, they're small business owners. So they go to their tax advisors and they can legitimately take a lot of deductions that can lower their taxable income legally. And what I say is, it's always important to talk to your tax advisor, and then we need to know the numbers that you should try to hit. So there's a trade-off in the years when you're about to apply for residency, either for a relative or for yourself. You want to make sure your income is high enough. So there's some strategy in tax preparation that also can be helpful to families. Fathers should try to document child support payments, even if you have an informal arrangement, even if you're paying in cash. I've had citizenship applications where out of the blue, we've been asked to document it. And so even if you have a notebook with dates, on this date, I gave $80 cash, it's helpful. So I suggest that people always document their child support payments. And then despite everything that we've been talking about right now, I do think that people need to get the benefits and services that they need for their families. So take care of your family first is what I tell my clients. If get the benefits that you need, and then we'll sort it out. Because that's the most important thing. The most immediate thing is that your family has the healthcare that they need, the food that they need, any sort of assistance that they need. For clients with criminal convictions, there's been a lot of work in California done on post-conviction relief. And this is sort of a very technical field. I'm not an expert in it. But it can be helpful for people to explore their options for this. In many circumstances, well, in some cases, post-conviction relief will help you with a lot of things, but not necessarily with your immigration case, but other times it will. So if you've had criminal convictions or even arrests in the past, and you're planning to apply for an immigration benefit, it's really important that you get your records and that you get a good immigration consultation. And if you can go back and get some post-conviction relief, either to vacate your conviction or to alter it in some ways, that can be helpful. So this is just for the, going back to the public charge, you know, they've created a lot of new paperwork for us to fill out, and it's not fun. For people who are adjusting status in the United States, there's this new form I-944 that asks for, you know, your assets, your education history. It wants a credit report and a credit score. It asks you all sorts of questions about whether you've applied for public benefits, whether you've disenrolled from public benefits. And unfortunately, it's required, so we have to do it now. There's a comparable form for people who are consular processing abroad. And, you know, again, the last point is really my takeaway. We don't know. This is all super new. We don't know how it's going to be adjudicated. We don't know. We haven't really worked out how we're going to fight back in the case that they really come on strong with this, but that's where we are right now.
Sarah, we've got a couple of questions. I know we're kind of running out of time, so I want to make sure we get to these questions. First one was, what about disability insurance?
That's interesting. Yeah. So
that's from Sandra Cross.
Yeah, and so yeah, disability insurance in, yeah, that's a good question. I'm sort of thinking about like SSI. Is that what you're thinking about?
Sandra, you feel free to jump in to clarify.
Yeah. No, this question is about I have in mind a family who works and the father become sick and he's getting state disability benefits. So this is included? No?
So to be eligible for state disability benefits, I think you would have to be, you know, a citizen or a resident. So you wouldn't be affected by the public charge.
No, this family, no, this person qualified and he's no permanent resident or citizenship.
Huh. Yeah, I would imagine. So I'm trying to envision exactly what that would look like in the, I would think that it would affect the application. But again, my advice would be to have a consultation and certainly not to disenroll from anything that you need before you talk to an immigration attorney. And I would want to see the exact source of it. My understanding is that mostly to get the SSI, you would have to be a citizen or a resident, in which case you wouldn't be subject to public charge.
Oh, yeah, but I'm not I'm not talking about SSI. Is the state, the person is working and he received the state disability insurance through EDD?
Through EDD, the state disability. So I'm actually not super familiar with that, so I don't want to give you an answer. I would say generally, if this person has a pending application for residency, I would say talk to a lawyer. Don't disenroll from anything before you've talked to a lawyer. If you need this and you have no way to apply for residency, right? No path to residency, then take the benefits that you need. And, if and when you're eligible for residency, you're going to have to sort it out. It's going to be an issue. But the first thing really is, get the benefits you need. And it's only going to be an issue for you if you have that application in for a green card.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question was, does using help from Covered California count as public charge?
So Covered California is the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act subsidized insurance. It should not.
Okay, thank you. And then the third one was curious about this good moral character qualifications. Can they use political organizing or involvement in organizations that fight for rights against applicants? Can they ask for social media as proof of character or at all on any of these applications?
Okay, so that good question. So good moral character, generally advocacy would not, affect that. We're looking at, criminal convictions, generally arrests, criminal convictions. Sometimes they look at child support. That's the type of thing that will go into the good moral character analysis. Social media. I'm glad you brought that up because they are looking at social media now. They're asking for your social media handles and, sometimes, especially for people coming into the country from abroad, they're sometimes asking to see their Facebook pages or, Instagram accounts. And so I do tell people, especially when people are leaving the country to consular process, I just say, why don't you deactivate those accounts or just go through ahead of time and purge so that your cousin doesn't post anything stupid that they're going to look at. And I haven't personally had a client who's had any issues with that, but we do hear about it. It's sort of, it would be a bad way to have an application go south. So I am telling people to sort of be mindful of their social media, deactivate while they are, in this interview period, and clean it up if it needs to be cleaned up.
Interesting. Good moral character is a requirement for immigration and not for becoming president.
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
Sorry.
Yeah. Right. So COVID. There's a lot of good. As horrible as the COVID pandemic is, I think that there's some good news for the immigrant community, which is that unemployment benefits won't affect the public charge. This California disaster relief assistance that's starting on Monday will not affect public charge. So if you've got an application in the works and you're taking this $500 or $1,000 a household, take it. It's not gonna go into the equation. Healthcare for COVID-19 isn't going to affect the public charge. So the USCIS has made a statement saying all non-citizens should get the care that they need. Any kind of testing or treatment, preventative care, even if it's covered by public costs, aren't going to be considered in the public charge tests. No negative impact on your application. And this is not only going to apply to people applying for green cards, but also any non-immigrants who want to extend their stay. So I think that's good news. We should all get the care that we need and encourage our community members to do so as well. And then this is what someone asked about earlier. There is a COVID-19 disaster relief for immigrants that the state of California is providing. This is so important to our undocumented community that they have been working, and often paying into the unemployment system, but they haven't been able to get out any of the federal benefits. So undocumented adults who show that they have been affected by COVID and who don't qualify for the CARES Act assistance can get $500 per person, up to $1,000 per household. starting on Monday. The application process is through nonprofit groups. In the Bay Area, it's Catholic Charities that is administering it. And these are the websites. There was a hotline number that they didn't have out. I checked this morning. Maybe you all have checked, more recently. They didn't have the hotline number out. I hope it gets up very quickly because the hotline areas or the hotline numbers for other regions of California are already up. But this is something we should definitely be getting the word out. I think, unfortunately, like so many relief packages, there won't be enough to go around. So we need people to apply quickly and to really get in line for this important kind of relief. And it's not going to affect any future applications. So people can apply with confidence. Am I out of time, Kevin?
We've got about 7 minutes. So we've still got a few more questions in the chat box. So I'm glad we have a little bit of time. No worries, everyone. The PowerPoint will be sent out. So the first question I have is there a program for low income folks to become a citizen?
Yes, so great news for people who are eligible to be citizens. There's a lot of free legal services for the citizenship application. There's a fee waiver for the citizenship application. So if you're low income, you can apply without the usual immigration fee. Our office does this, so all of our offices around the Bay Area do free citizenship applications for low income immigrants with fee waivers. So the total out-of-pocket cost will be nothing. We also have classes for the citizenship course, which are helpful. And I think it's also just, nice to be supported when you're taking this step. And I believe we're doing remote classes during the pandemic. So we're continuing this citizenship education work.
Thanks, Sarah. And then from Maria, can families that have applied for residency or are in the U visa process apply on Monday, May 18th for the COVID aid?
Yes, so the California program will apply to anyone who doesn't qualify for the Federal CARES Act. So many people with pending U visas and who are undocumented with pending applications will fall into this group. So I think in many cases, yes, that's exactly who this is targeted for.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Maria. And then how much is it to become a U.S. citizen?
Well, so it depends. The normal filing fee for people who don't qualify for a fee waiver is $725. And then if you earn less than 200% of the poverty level, it's you get a reduced, but more than 150, you get a reduced fee. So there's a reduced fee of, I think it's $340. And then if you earn under 150% of the poverty level, or you get a means tested benefit like Medi-Cal, you can get a free application. So for low income people, they can get through the citizenship application process for free without paying, both the legal work and the fee.
Thank you. And then from Elia, she said when you have a green card for 5 years, you apply. I don't know if that's a question or a statement.
Yeah, for citizenship, yeah. So normally for most people, you can apply for citizenship when you've had your green card for 5 years. If you are married to a citizen, and have lived with them for the 3 years, you can apply after 3 years.
Okay. And then again, I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment. Pending and U.S. and U visas, okay? Not sure. Can you please clarify if you're still on the call? And then I have a question. Do DACA people qualify for the $1,200 incentive check or the immigration one that was approved by California governor?
Yeah, so DACA people will generally be working with a valid Social Security number and valid work authorization documents. So they should qualify for the federal program, which is the $1,200. If they've let their work authorization lapse and somehow they're found not to qualify for the federal program, then they can apply for the state program. Okay.
Sarah, can you say the name of your organization one more time?
Yeah, it's the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, iibayarea.org. And I'm in the Oakland office. We're on 3rd Street off of Broadway.
Okay, thank you. And I believe this question is for you. Does anyone in your office speak other languages? If so, which languages?
Yeah, so we have robust Spanish capacity. We have lawyers who speak Mandarin, French, German, Farsi, Urdu, Dari, and we have mom capacity. And we also, because we're part of the CDSS program, we have access to language line phone interpreters, so we can operate in just about any language with a little bit of lead time.
Okay, thank you. I believe I got to all the questions in the chat. We're gonna wrap up. It's about 12:28. Virve has already posted the survey for today's webinar, the link to the survey for today's webinar in the chat box. She just did it again. Thank you, Virve. So we want to thank Sarah for sharing all of this very helpful information with us. Make sure we get it back out to the families that we're working with. Any final comments, Sarah?
No, just thank you all so much for your time and for your work, and we're gonna get through this.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for spending your beautiful Friday